So, trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about a sensitive topic. There is a particular therapist that has discussed how maybe rapists or sexual predators should have a hotline that they should be able to call into and talk to someone before they're getting ready to offend. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. I thought I would take some time to talk about this as someone who has worked with sex offenders and the like. It's an interesting concept, but from what I know about, and this is my experience as a professional, what my experience and my knowledge has taught me about rapists and other sexual predators and deviants is they are all about power and control, and they don't want to be talked out of doing something. Even ones who have gone through treatment and things like that. My knowledge in working with them, when I worked in the Department of Corrections for quite some time, what they may do or what they have been known to do in my experience is they will go ahead and offend or do something that they're not supposed to do and then want to come back and talk about it, how they may feel bad about it after the fact, but they actually don't want to stop beforehand. They don't want to be talked out of doing things, and there's a lot of secrecy around what they want to do, and so they will lie and they will manipulate and they will try to pretend like they're doing something else or going somewhere else or talking to somebody for a particular reason. They'll be dishonest about what their intentions are, essentially, because they don't want to be talked out of it. And they will lie about that. And so they will not admit that they were thinking about offending, or they are taking actions in preparation to sexually offend. And that's been my experience across the board with sexual sex offenders. And so what will happen in terms of in interventions, if someone is being honest about that that they were offending and things, they'll come after the fact, meaning that they'll do the sexual behavior that they know they shouldn't have been doing, or they'll lie about it and say they didn't do it when they actually did do it. But the closest you will ever get in terms in my experience, in terms of you know I don't even know if you want to call it a guilty conscience, but in terms of thinking about change, is people, sex offenders will say, you know what, I don't need to be out of jail. I don't need to be out of prison. I need to stay right where I'm at because I know that I have a big problem. And if you let me out in the public, I'm going to do it again. And that's, I'm just reframing it generally speaking, but that they'll say something along the lines of that, knowing that's the closest you're going to get to an admission, but that's after the fact because they don't want to be stopped, they don't want to be controlled. They may wish that it didn't. Their compulsion to do such things didn't have as much power over them as it does, but that's as close as you were going to get. I've never had one yet to say, you know what, Dr. Jones, I've been thinking about this, and I'm here to talk to you because I don't want to. I want you to stop me from what I'm about to do. No, they'll do what they're going to do and then come after the fact, and then they'll say, well, Dr. Jones, I wish I didn't have these urges, and I wish, that kind of stuff. They'll say some stuff along the lines, but it's always after the fact. Now, in terms of people that, in terms of people who are violent, that there have been some interventions with beforehand that wanted to be talked out of doing something or wanted some coping skills to be able to not offend. Have people that may have been violent towards someone else or even towards themselves. So people who are suicidal or homicidal. And again, there can be exceptions because even when people are like determined to do something, a lot of times they will not call or ask for an intervention. But I have had people who have been suicidal or homicidal that, they want some skills, they want to talk about it. They are going through something stressful and they don't want to do these things. And so, when talking to someone who's homicidal, there are people who will actually turn in weapons and things like that, who say, you know what, I don't want to do it. But these are people that know that they have a problem. They're usually in treatment, and they really want to have a different way of life that's not across the board, that's not standard, that's not every case. But there are people that have patterns of extreme violence, even people who have, killed somebody and says, you know what, I'm a threat to killing somebody else, and I don't want to do that. And there are people who do that. That is usually based on people who have problems with emotionally regulating, controlling their anger, and they're taking steps to try to control their anger. So I want to point that out, that those actions or people who do that are not so much driven by power and control. I will say people who are driven by power and control usually do not want to be talked out of it, and usually do not want to disclose. But they still, there's an emotional component to people who still do that as well. Like people who are so driven by rage, then they'll unalive somebody, that kind of stuff. And so those things can have a play, but usually people who are trying to be better about managing their emotions around said actions are usually the ones that are likely to report, call in, things like that. Other types of criminals, criminal behavior, and where people are likely to reach out for interventions. Um, in my experience, people who are on the run, so people who are absconding, they're on the run from the U.S. Marshals. There have been people who reached out and say, you know what, can I talk to you? I know I'm doing something. I'm afraid, and I'm paraphrasing, but these types of people will do things because they're struggling with managing impulses, as well as their emotions. There's a lot of things going on. There may be substances on board. There could be all kinds of things like that. So to give you an example, I don't know, and maybe this is not necessarily a good example, but when OJ took off in the Bronco, and he's like doing something that he's not supposed to do, but they're making phone calls or they're doing things like that, I think, from what I recall. But again, sometimes this will be people who've never had treatment, but again, in my experience, it's more likely to happen with people who have been in treatment, who have been working on managing impulses, and other things that they know they shouldn't be doing, and people who are also invested in their treatment. So a lot of times, even when they're messing up, they may call their therapist on the way, and that's something that has been known to happen. But generally, when you're talking about sexual crimes, and things of that nature, people who are likely to commit and offend, um, in my experience, I've never had someone who's wanted to reach out for intervention beforehand. They want to do what they want to do, and then they may speak up about it after. And then, so their thinking is do what I want to do now, and then beg for forgiveness later, so to speak. And it's not really begging for forgiveness, but more or less admitting to what they did. So I hope that helps. Thank you guys so much. Like, share, and subscribe to the newsletter, for to have further discussions and to be in the loop about things going on, that I will be putting out soon. Thanks so much.